So welcome everyone to our Thursday evening meditation and Dhamma talk. Am I right in thinking that we are all old hands at meditation and don't need an explanation about how to meditate anymore? You would like an explanation? Okay, so I will backtrack very quickly about meditation and say that meditation generally works with a part of ourselves that we often neglect because it's invisible, not like our body, which we can clearly see and take good care of its health without too much trouble. There's another important part of ourselves which is not so easy to see, which we often neglect. And this part of ourself, for short, we might call it our mind, but perhaps it's easier to think of it as our awareness or our focus of attention. And this part of ourself is often pulled away from us to the things around us in our busy lives. So whatever it is that's trying to hijack our attention at any particular moment, it usually manages to do that for the whole day. And although it's good to be attentive about what's going on in our lives, sometimes we need a time when we can come back to ourselves, have some downtime, relax ourselves. And if we're not able to do that, then often we have problems such as finding it hard to get to sleep at night, for example, or just having so many thoughts on our mind that it drives us to a sense of worry and concern. So meditation offers a way to reposition the focus of our attention back within ourselves instead of being caught up in the things around us in the world. And there are many ways to meditate, but in general they offer a way to relocate the mind inside ourselves. And there's a place inside us where if we are able to relocate our mind to that point, then it's the most efficient and most effective as a way to replenish the energies of the mind and get a sense of calm. So exactly how we might relocate our mind to come to that point inside us, down on the level of our belly. If we were to do a breathing meditation, then we might put our mind on our breath and allow the breath to bring our mind down to that point. Because we can't see the mind directly, but we can put our mind on something which we can work with, i.e. our breath. An even simpler way to work with the mind is to use some sort of imaginary image. So you might conjure up a picture of something like the sun shining, for example, and then put that picture down in the area of the stomach. And for as long as you can keep your mind on the picture, then your mind will also be located down there on the level of our diaphragm. So it might be a picture or it might be a feeling, but the idea is that we keep our mind gently in place by means of that imaginary object. If the mind wanders off, then we just bring it back again to the object. The object disappears, we can think of a new one. And generally, when we're meditating, we have a little bit of preparation in terms of making ourselves physically comfortable, first of all. That might be by sitting cross-legged on the floor, or it might be by sitting up straight in a chair. But either way, the way we put our hands together is with the right hand on top of the left hand, and the index finger of the right hand up against the thumb of the left hand. And that gives us a little bit of a warning signal if ever we get sleepy, because our finger tends to slip out of place. We tend to scan down through our body at the beginning of every meditation to make sure all the muscles are relaxed. Sometimes we think we are relaxed, but when it comes down to it, we find there are still places where there are tensions which we can relax before we start our meditation. As for our state of mind, usually the second 5 minutes of any meditation would be working with our state of mind, relaxing ourselves, putting aside any worries or concerns that happen to be on our mind, and conjuring up a positive state of mind. And only after that do we do a little exercise with that inner object as a way to relocate our awareness back to the center of our body. If we have a lot of thoughts in our mind, often we can get away with reducing them by ignoring those thoughts But if they are really too many to ignore, then we might make use of a mantra instead, hearing the sound of a mantra repeated over and over again in the mind. Traditionally, the words Samma Arahang, which you can see on the slide, which mean a pure state of mind achieved in the proper way. Or it could be any other mantra or short affirmation which you find easier to remember. But hearing the sound of that over and over in the mind will tend to cut through any thoughts you have in case they are particularly numerous. So we're going to sit for meditation, usually on a Thursday night, for about 45 minutes. And then after that, I'll move on to the subject matter for today's Dhamma talk. We'd like to start by settling yourself into a comfortable posture for yourself in meditation. Closing your eyes very gently, in much the same way you might close your eyes to go to sleep. Slowing yourself down and relaxing by taking a few deep breaths to yourself. Breathing in the cool, refreshing air from around you, and then breathing slowly and smoothly out again. Once again, you can breathe to the full extent of your lungs. And as you breathe out, you may feel that you're letting go of any previous worries or concerns that you might have had. From there, we do our normal pre-flight check to make sure our body is properly relaxed for the meditation ahead. And this involves scanning down through the whole of our body to make sure each and every muscle of our body is properly relaxed. So starting at our forehead, we release any tension in the muscles there. We relax our eyebrows and our eyelids, taking care that the way we've closed our eyes is as gentle as possible. There's no need to squeeze our eyes tightly shut. It's only necessary to close our eyes to the point where our upper and lower eyelashes are just touching together. We allow the muscles of our face to become soft, relaxing our jaw, taking care not to clench our teeth together, and avoiding even pursing our lips. From there, we can relax the muscles of our neck. And if our shoulders are tense, we allow them to drop to their natural height. Then we relax both arms, our forearms, and eventually our hands and fingers, so that the way our hands rest in our lap is as light and gentle as possible. You continue on down by relaxing all the muscles in our torso, chest, trunk, and eventually the whole of our abdomen. We take particular care to relax the muscles across our stomach. Before relaxing both legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes. Until eventually all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes, we feel satisfied that there's no remaining part of our body with any sort of stress or tension anymore. If we do notice places where tension seems to linger on, we do our best to relax it as far as we can. And it should leave us with a sense that our whole body is something that we can forget about, as if it seems to melt away into the atmosphere around us, allowing us to turn our attention instead to the feeling on the inside, that sense of warmth and well-being, or a sense of inner space, something which by any other name we might call our state of mind. And to relax our state of mind further in preparation for the meditation ahead, we take a few moments to let go of all the normal worries and concerns we associate with our everyday life. If there are urgent things, then we try to put them on the side for now. We put them on one side, perhaps with the promise to ourselves that we can come back to think about them at a later time. We try not to dwell on any regrets from our past, and also avoid the temptation to make any plans for the future. We try to remain as much as possible in the here and now, with the realization that the present moment is really the only place in our lives that we can make any difference. So we try to focus on the task in hand, gathering our attention back from any possible distractions in the outside world to a place of peace and serenity that lies inside us. Generally, the best place for peace and quiet in the mind is the area somewhere around our stomach. And by maintaining our attention inside us, in this place, it will help our mind to start to absorb the positive energies of the inner world. At the same time, although we may be aware of what's going on around us, but we'll find that what's going on around us doesn't perturb the mind anymore. Instead, our mind absorbs the positive qualities from inside us, a sense of happiness and joy, as if our whole mind were filled with tiny particles of that happiness and joy. And if such a feeling doesn't come naturally to us, then we might cast our mind back to a time in our life when we felt truly happy, picking up more on the feeling it gave us than on the actual situation. And we allow that feeling to grow and spread within ourselves until it fills every last corner of our body and mind, leaving no space in the mind for any other sort of thought. When we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently and using no effort at all, we can imagine that inside our body is nothing but a hollow cavity or an empty space. Or you might prefer to imagine that your body is rather like a transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. Those who've been meditating for longer may feel that their body has disappeared entirely. And that meditating is rather like inhabiting some great empty space, but a space that you know is your own. But whatever your experience is of the inner world, now would be the time to allow the focus of your attention to drift slowly downwards on the midline of your body, drifting downwards until it seems to come to rest somewhere in the general area of your stomach. In the ideal world, of course, the place will be the seventh base of the mind or the exact center of the body. But in practice, we tend to use our feeling to tell us the correct place. Because if it feels right, then it generally is right. For some people, merely bringing the mind into place will already give rise to inner experience, which they can then adopt as the object of their meditation. If this is the case, then any imagery or inner feeling can form the focus of our attention. And our brief in the meditation would be simply to observe the way in which that inner experience transforms further. However, if you're newer to the meditation practice, if you're still in some doubt about the exact position of the center of the body, it may be necessary to conjure up some sort of inner object of your own as a starting point or an anchor for the mind. And that inner object may be something that you can feel, or it may be something that you can see. A good example might be something like an inner bright object such as the sun shining, a full moon, a star, perhaps a diamond. If you're more tactile by nature, then it might be the feeling that you have the presence of an object like a small fruit floating at the center of yourself. Maybe something like a small grape or a nectarine with a certain weight and texture, a certain size and temperature, resting at the center of yourself. Doesn't matter whether the object inside you is realistic or not. Even if it's rather vague, then we accept it anyway. But if we do find that our attention is distracted away by other things, each time we realize, we simply bring our attention back again. And if we're new to meditation, then we might need to persevere with bringing the mind back repeatedly. But each time we do bring the mind back to the center, it will become a little bit easier to keep it there the next time round. So if the mind wanders, we bring it back. If the object disappears, then we can conjure up a new one. If the object transforms into something else, then instead of changing it back, then we just follow it in its new form. As for the problem of there being an excess of thought in the mind, if you find that this is the case, then you may be able to reduce the number of thoughts simply by ignoring them or by starving them of attention. But if the number of thoughts in the mind is really too many simply to ignore, it may be necessary to return to our good friend, the mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang coming up from the center of the body or from the center of the inner object, almost like a silent music, over and over again with the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, over and over again, lightly, gently, and continuously, helping to keep our mind on track at the center, but also reducing the number of thoughts in the mind down to a manageable level until we reach a point where the mind seems to have settled into silence. We maintain our mind with the utmost gentleness, never rushing the process, never trying to force our hand. We continue in this way for a few moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. the center of our body. While quietening down our thoughts, possibly by ignoring them, possibly by using the mantra Dhamma to keep the thoughts at a manageable level, to bring the mind gently towards a state of silence, to allow the mind to focus on the inner object that we have chosen for ourselves. We find our attention wandering away to other things each time we realize. We just bring our attention back again. If the object disappears, we can think of a new one. But if it changes, we just follow it in its new form. If we feel uncomfortable, we can just try changing or adjusting our position. But we try to do so in a way that neither perturbs the state of mind inside ourselves that we've built up for ourselves, nor disturbs the people around us. We continue to keep our mind on track in this way for a few more moments in silence, lightly and gently, continuously at the center of our body for a few more moments now in silence until we come to time for some loving-kindness meditation. attention at the center of the body the whole of the time, always at the center of whatever inner experience we've built up for ourselves as a result of the meditation so far this evening. For some people, the inner experience will add up to the sense of inner brightness, in which case we can place our attention at the center of the inner brightness very gently, in a way that allows that brightness to spread outwards from the central point. For others for whom meditation is something more like an inner feeling, again we can place the attention very gently at the center of that feeling, in a way that allows the sensation to become larger in size, spreading outwards from that central point. For others still, it will be some sort of inner picture, and in the same way we can place our attention very gently at the center of the picture, in a way that allows the picture to become larger in size, spreading outwards. And this process of allowing the inner experience to expand is known as the spreading of loving kindness. And initially we allow the inner experience to extend in this way until it fills the whole of our own body, while making the wish at the center of ourselves that may we be well and happy, free from all suffering. And again from our center, but extending the loving kindness outwards beyond ourselves, we allow the loving kindness to spread outwards to fill the whole of the meditation hall. Further still outwards to the whole of the meditation center, while at the same time making the wish at the center of ourselves that all living beings in the meditation center be touched by our loving kindness, that those living beings be well and happy, free from all suffering, live together in peace and harmony. And again from our center, but extending our loving kindness further outward still. And if it's easier, we can imagine spreading loving kindness across a map seen in bird's eye view. We can extend loving kindness outwards to the whole of the neighborhood, further outwards to the whole town, whole borough, to the whole county. With a wish that all living beings in the county be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. Extend loving kindness further outwards the whole county, neighbouring counties, whole of England, British Isles, neighbouring countries, further outwards the entire continent, with the wish that all living beings on this continent be touched by our loving kindness, that they all be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We can extend our loving kindness further still to all the continents of the world, so that our loving kindness extends across the whole face of this planet, while making the wish that all living beings whether on the land, in the air, or in the sea, be touched by our loving kindness. And those living beings be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. That true peace might prevail on our planet within the space of our own lifetimes. We can extend loving kindness further outwards into the universe around, in all the 6 great directions. Extending loving kindness in the forward direction. Extending loving kindness towards the back. Extending loving kindness to our left. And extending loving kindness to our right. Extending loving kindness above us. And extending loving kindness below. Extending loving kindness without bounds or limits, until it becomes a sort of universal love reaching everywhere in the universe, touching all living beings, wherever they may be, without exception. Again, with the wish that all living beings be well and happy, free from suffering, live together in peace and harmony. We might also extend loving kindness to particular loved ones, towards those for whom we feel a sense of gratitude, towards those who are still alive, and towards those who have already passed. We extend loving kindness in this way for the last few moments of our meditation together until we come to the appropriate time. Pe Buddha Palapata Pacheka Nanchayam Balang Arahanta Nanchate Jena Arakam Bantami Sapaso Sapaputthanupavena Sapadhammanupavena Sapasankhanupavena Satha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for this evening, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So not too difficult, I hope, for those who are new to meditation today. Okay? Something to focus on inside? Okay. So, today I'd like to continue from where I left off last time you saw me, which is going back to last week sometime, and to give you the bigger picture about the subjects which I've been talking about over the last few weeks. We are working our way slowly up a staircase of Buddhist values and virtues and practices contained in something known as the Mangala Sutta, which means the discourse on 38 blessings. And there are 38 steps which start with very basic values, virtues, practices in life and lead to more esoteric or transcendental ones. So at this time we have worked our way up to the 16th step, and the theme generally at this point in the blessings is how you can be a pillar of society or give something back to society. So the idea at this point is that you have your life pretty much where it needs to be. You can stand on your own 2 feet financially. Your family is pretty harmonious, and now you're looking to do something for others. And the blessing immediately before this one was to do with being generous. And at this point, we are starting to look at what is known as Dhammacharya or Dhamma practice, which might look like it just means like meditating a lot, but actually the word Dhamma means what is right or just or conforms with true nature. And last time, in the first half of this blessing number 16, we already looked at what Buddhists mean when they say working towards purity in life. And there are 2 ways of looking at that. One is, how can you purify yourself to become a more pure person, purify yourself of any maybe things you regret in your past in order to put yourself in a place where you can start to move forward. And the bad news last time was that we don't have a simple way to sort of do a quick reset in our life like some other religions do, where you can just go to a confessional and spill the beans to the priest and sort of come out feeling lighter. But we can do what's known as dilution, which means adding more and more good things in our life so that any bad things that we regret from our past are in the minority by comparison. But today we move to the other aspect of purity, which means how can we increase the amount of purity in our life or conform with what is pure in our life. So we might be talking about Dhamma practice, not just as a pathway out of past unwholesomeness, but how to accord our life with what is pure and increase the amount of purity in our lives. So you might call it pure practice for short. Yeah. And it's not just on an individual level, but it concerns society as well, because the purity of everyone in society, especially what they share with those around them, amounts to the well-being on a social level. And generally speaking, within Buddhism, the way in which people fit together into our larger society is explained in the Sigalabhada Sutta as the way we are connected through the habits that brush off on us to 6 other major social groups in our lives. And many of these we've already talked about in blessings that I've talked about. So, for example, above us we have clergy in our lives. The clergy's duties to the congregation we already saw in blessing number 3. Then we have students and teachers there, a little teacher in the black mortarboard. We looked at that in blessing number 7. We have our blessings, the duties towards our parents, which we saw in blessing number 11. Our parents are the ones with a walking stick there at the front. And we have our duties towards our children, raising our children properly, blessing number 12. That's the wife with the frying pan there, I think. We have our marital duties, blessing number 13. We have the duty of the congregation in support of their spiritual mentors, which we saw in the last blessing, number 15. And there's even the duties towards between employer and employee, which we will go on to look at in blessing number 18. So if we were to put an overview of habit formation, no matter what group we're talking about, into one single graphic, under the influence of the 6 directions which we have here, which is where our habits tend to come from. So there we have 6 directions raining down on us, with the arrows above, giving us what we might call our envor human environment. So to change ourselves, to get our sense of human dignity for ourselves, then all those habits come down to us and give us our own sense of responsibility for ourself, which means the human dignity on our personal level. Once we've got that sorted out, then we can start to think about promoting human dignity for others in our immediate family, those we know, and broader still for society and the economy in general. Then we also need to promote a sense of human dignity in a wider economy as well. And I'll come back to say how we might do this in a way that brings purity and Dhamma on all those levels. Last time we looked a lot at how we have it in ourselves, and we had the 10-fold path of wholesomeness, if you remember, the one that gives you long life. Yes, you remember, I hope. And that, in brief, would come down to breaking the first 4 precepts to do with killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, or telling lies, otherwise known as the defilements of action. If we are talking about on the level of society, this means how we deal purely or in a level-headed way or in a fair and just way with the other people in our lives, whose lives we also influence. And when we're talking about the human dignity of others or society in general on that level, the key virtues which we need to build up for ourselves are freedom from bias or prejudice. And in Buddhism, in the Buddhist teachings, they talk about bias or prejudice coming from in 4 different forms. The first is bias originating in desires of various sorts, or liking of in its various contexts. For example, if parents don't love their children equally, because of favoritism, then then they would treat their children unfairly. So that would not good, right? Second sort of bias is based on hatred. For example, teachers might treat their students unfairly because they have some students make themselves more annoying. Yeah. So you give them less than their due grades. Okay. Third sort is to do with ignorance. So bias based on ignorance may be because of your own stupidity or just lack of information. So you're making decisions based on a lack of information, which is either incompetent or just plain unprofessional. And the last one is bias because of fear. And sometimes we think of a fearful person as being someone to be pitied, but in fact they can also be a particularly dangerous sort of person. So, for example, a person who is under duress might bear false witness, so deviate from the truth. So trampling dignity because of bias starts with trampling your own dignity because you twist the truth in your own heart and mind, first of all. So that when it comes to your dealings with other people will come out in forms of prejudice of various sorts. If you are the sort of person who is aware of your prejudices and who is able to make good decisions in spite of them, then you are the sort of person who has more leadership potential because you can influence other people's lives in a positive way if you are a person who yourself is free of those sorts of bias. If you're on your own and you don't make decisions about anyone else's lives, you can be as biased as you like. But if you come to deal with other people's lives, then you have to check yourself for bias first of all. Otherwise, you will undermine the human dignity of those around you whose lives are affected by your decisions. So a third facet of Dhamma practice is behaving in accordance with what is true or just. And this comes back to this idea of leadership and a person who is in a position of leadership having to have particular qualities in keeping with the responsibilities which they are upholding. And it's not just a list of 4 which we're dealing with here, but actually much more, 10 qualities which are known as the virtues of a ruler, or Raja Dhamma in the Buddhist scriptures. And they're almost like standards of moral caliber, which are supposed to apply whether it's a monarch or a president or someone in political leadership. The only real difference is that monarchs tend to stay in power as long as they're alive, whereas presidents or politicians come and go and they have limited lengths of office. But although this doesn't offer much guidance about despotic acts or rewriting constitutions and that sort of thing, or undermining democratic rights, it applies more to the personal qualities of the people who find themselves at the top in leadership. So what do we have? It said that these might, in the present day, these might be known as the qualities of a person who might be referred to as a philosopher king. So generosity, dana, self-discipline, so keeping the precepts. So they need to have integrity. They must be a person who has self-sacrifice or sacrifices of themselves for the greater good. Integrity, gentleness, austerity, so not being a person who is attached to luxuries. Non-anger, so they need to be able to keep a lid on their anger. Non-violence, patience, and not deviating from what is righteous. It's probably quite hard to find anyone who measures up to these sort of things these days. So we have a thing called democracy to sort of make sure they don't stay in power for too long, maybe. Yes. In some of the Buddhist scriptures, there are certain individuals who manage to live up to these qualities. And such exemplary rulers have existed at certain times in history, and they're known as universal monarchs or chakravartins. Have you heard of them before? They're sometimes seen as a sort of secular counterpart to the Buddha. And they're not found just in Buddhism, but also Hinduism, Jainism also have the same word. But they are the sort of monarchs or rulers who have such a good reputation that people of neighboring countries come along and petition them to come and rule their country too. You know, they like them so much. So they can unite the whole world without borders, just through the willingness of people to want to be under their rule. Yeah. So it's not sort of conquering the whole world or anything like that. It's like unifying the whole world in a sense without borders. So if you want to have an example of the sort of things you can expect of a just ruler, according to the Buddhist scriptures, there's a Jataka story, which is the 334th one, about a king of Benares who wasn't making a very good job of ruling his kingdom. So to find out what was wrong, he sneaked out of the palace in disguise, and he wandered around in his kingdom to find out what he'd been doing wrong. And in the course of his wanderings, he came to the Himalayas, and the Bodhisattva, so the Buddha-to-be, was a hermit, or living as an ascetic in the foothills of the Himalayas. And the ascetic gave the king in disguise, he didn't know who he was, some ripe figs. But no matter which tree he picked the fig from, it was always bitter in taste. And the king asked the Bodhisattva, how come the figs are so bitter? And unaware that the subject of the conversation was standing right in front of him, the ascetic explained to him that the present ruler of this country was failing to rule in accordance with the 10 virtues of the ruler, which we just saw. And the king thanked the Bodhisattva, snuck back to the palace, and from that time on he tried much harder to be a good ruler. And several years later, when he had the chance to return to the same mountain hermitage, when he picked figs from the trees, lo and behold, can you guess? They all tasted sweet. Yeah. So this is how even the qualities of a ruler can affect the whole environment of the kingdom. Yeah. And at that time, the king returned to his palace, feeling now vindicated. Yes. It's a similar story, and this one is of roof beams. Another Jataka story called the Cuckoo Jataka, but not the cuckoo bird. Okay. And at that time, the Buddha-to-be was the counselor to the king. And really, it was his job to speak truth to power. But the monarch who he was looking after, called King Brahmadatta, was an unjust ruler. And he used to extort taxes or extract taxes from his subjects by violent means. And afraid of the king's temper, the Bodhisattva, or the Buddha-to-be, he had to wait very tactfully for a long time without saying anything, looking for the opportunity to mention something to the king about what he should do differently. However, the opportunity presented itself when the king and his counselor were visiting a building site in the royal park. And the roof was not complete, and the rafters had just been laid in place. And the king asked, how come the rafters can stay in place without falling down? And having found his opportunity, the counselor said to him, "Just as the peak of the roof will fall unless held tightly in place by the rafters," so peak, rafters are what hold it in place, "the king will soon fall from power unless he is supported by his subjects, who have been won over by his righteousness." So at that time, he started to understand that from that time forth he must behave in a more just way in the way he received the taxes from his subjects. So sometimes in the West we feel pretty smug about we do things in the right way, we're always just, and we never have things like tin pot dictatorships and that sort of thing. And we have the feeling that things like injustice and atrocities can never happen here. But often if we know what the telltale signs are, we can recognize that we can never afford to be complacent, even in a so-called advanced democracy. And there was an exhibition I saw when I visited the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta about the early warning signs of human rights starting to be compromised, which can happen in any society. And it starts with ghettoization, where particular social groups are forced to relocate, often to a neglected area. The second warning sign is when people get labeled with groups or symbols or are forced to carry identity papers. Third early warning sign is defamation of particular social groups who are often referred to as disloyal or subhuman. Sometimes there's stockpiling of weapons without any evidence of any existential threat to the country. Sometimes certain groups of people are subjected to sort of a slow death by disruption to things like drinking water or sanitation or other vital services. Sometimes there's interference in reproductive rights, ring any bells, suppressing certain social groups to limit their numbers. And there's destruction of cultural or religious artifacts. Or there's a particular targeting by threats, imprisonment, or disappearances. So, of course, governments or nations can confront these atrocities or these warning signs. No. Sometimes we think, well, that's their job, after all. But it's also important that individuals don't get caught up as just like bystanders or collaborators in these sort of things happening. And according to John Stuart Mill, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So speaking out or helping those targeted by violence or injustice is really the only difference between you being a bystander and an upstander or an upstanding person. So if you ask why people do stand by and do nothing when things are very obviously wrong, is sometimes prejudices can get into our subconscious and we fail to do something about it. Coming back to the four things we just looked at, sometimes is out of fear. So we go along with perpetrators of injustice just in order to protect ourselves. Second reason might be because of personal gain or economic gain and allowing others to be victimized. Sometimes it's just blind obedience. So you think back to what we looked at just now. We had greed, hatred, fear, and ignorance. So very similar, okay? Blind obedience because some people are told by authority figures that such and such is right, so they're afraid to rock the boat. Sometimes they have prejudices, which we've already talked about, often stoked by propaganda. Sometimes people just don't know what else to do. Sometimes they don't have anyone they can look to for support. It seems like no one else is helping. And sometimes all of these 6 excuses mean that tolerating injustice is the easy thing to do, but in terms of the bodhisattva or someone who's trying to lead all living beings towards nirvana, then doesn't really live up to what we ought to do if we still stand for injustice, which we see happening in front of us. So what can we do in order to get Dhamma practice into our everyday life? Sometimes we are held back because of a lack of morale to do the right thing. Sometimes we say, well, I want to do everything perfectly, so you don't do any of it. Otherwise known as letting perfect be the enemy of the good. So even if you're only able to keep 5 precepts, like once a week, it still gives the chance for you to rest from doing some sort of unwholesomeness from time to time. And seeing as the world is imperfect by nature, then some good advice for how to make this work better for you is to be selective about your career path, avoid doing things you do in a shoddy way, prejudice, and also trying to meditate as much as you can. Being selective about your career path, we will come back to what's known as right livelihood in blessing number 18. So 2 blessings to go for that one. We should also try to avoid shoddy work of any sort. So, for example, if a monk's giving a talk, then they should prepare first and have references rather than just making it up as they go along. Also, if you realize you have bias or prejudice, you still harbor that, then try to first become aware of it. I realize that I might be accused myself of cultural appropriation, like a white person, like trying to be a Buddhist and that sort of thing. But even I try to find out what my blind spots are and try to find out about the issues, try to read about the lived experiences of people from other ethnic backgrounds, and also challenge my attitudes as well to try to become more woke and appropriate. Overcoming prejudices of various sorts, you should try to commit yourself to egalitarianism as much as possible. If you do come across biases which you have, then you have to realize that that is not the real you. But really you are both your conscious and your unconscious, so you have to accept the whole of who you are. If there are differences which you perceive, then try to acknowledge them rather than ignoring them. And seek out friendship from people who are maybe unlike you in order to get yourself outside your bubble. And also increase your brain's familiarity with diverse perspectives. If you do come across other groups who are not like you, then it's natural to focus on how they're different from you. But actually, something possibly more useful is to focus on what you have in common in terms of your qualities and goals. And if you do come across examples of things where people are unambiguously being biased, then you need to call them out in order to help to create and reinforce a sort of better standard to hold people to. Lastly, meditating. No matter how smart you are, the only real way to, it's said, to center yourself and to come away from all the things which are pulling you off balance, whether it be greed, hate, delusion, fear, which are trying to enforce biases upon you, the only way to stay centered is to be a meditator. So never forget to meditate as well. I finished today with a story. maybe one you're familiar with. And it illustrates the conflict between those who are in leadership roles and also the transcendental values of those who aspire towards nirvana. So you might think that if you are, let's say, the king, then anything you do is fine, right? Because like you're the boss. You reckon? Well, one of the very final stories in the Jatakas, and usually the last 10 Jataka stories, talk about how the Buddha-to-be really picked up on the perfections that he's going to need to become the Buddha. There's one particular Jataka story, sometimes it's called the Mahanipata Jataka, sometimes called the Muggapaka Jataka. But in any case, the Bodhisattva was born as a young prince, and his name was Temiya. His father was the king at the time, king of Kasi in India. And the king, the severe-looking guy in the gold there, he wanted to groom the young prince for kingship from an early age. So he let the baby, or the child, lie in his lap while he was in court, pronouncing death sentences on criminals brought before him. So even as a young child, Prince Temiya had already been cultivating perfections for many lifetimes. And he was starting to be able to recall some of his past lifetimes as well. And he realized that he had also been a king in a similar position, pronouncing death sentences on others. And as a result, he had suffered the retribution of 20,000 years in the unfortunate realms. So even though the king didn't kill or execute those criminals himself, but simply by pronouncing the death sentence on them, he had a part of that bad karma, which had led to his bad rebirth for many tens of thousands of years. So he realized that he didn't want to make the same mistake twice. So this is the boy here, not the king. So in order to avoid history repeating itself, he hatched a plan to make himself unfit for governance. So what did he do? From that day on, he feigned dumbness, so being unable to speak. And the royal family got in all the best doctors and physicians to prod him and poke him and see what was wrong with him, that he couldn't speak anymore, but they were unable to find the reason. They tried punishing him. They tried tempting him, but every effort failed. And the royals did not want someone with a speech impediment to sully its lineage, so they decided to basically put him on that rubbish heap. So when he reached the age of 16, they ordered his execution. So they had the executioner sort of take him out, dig a grave for him, and then sort of do it quietly, where no one else can see. So as his grave was being dug by the gravedigger, and the gravedigger was a nice guy called Sunanta, suddenly the prince found his voice, and he asked Sunanta to let him go and just tell the royal family that he was already dead and buried. And Sunanta was overcome by compassion for the young prince and released him on the condition that he run off and become an ascetic. And as an ascetic, Temiya actually became quite well known. And eventually his reputation even reached the ears of his royal parents, who by this time had sort of forgiven him. And both the king and the queen visited his hermitage, and upon hearing his teaching, also decided to renounce the world and become ascetics like him. So in the end, not only Temiya, but also his parents, the royal family, and also many of the citizens of Kasi and 3 neighboring kingdoms followed his example. So this is an example of how the power of Dhamma practice, if you pursue it to the degree you would put your life on the line, show how the Bodhisattva, the Buddha-to-be, never veered from his intention to attain Buddhahood, nirvana, even when tempted by the comfort and luxury of being at the top in terms of royal governance. Yeah. So for today, for anyone who is new to meditation, if you found it was useful to you today, I would encourage you to practice further. Practice makes perfect, and the way to do that in practice would be to try to find 20 minutes to meditate at home each day, at a time of the day when you're not too tired, when you're not going to be interrupted, and when you know that in your daily routine you can do it on a regular basis. So it might be first thing in the morning, might be last thing at night, but doing it for 20 minutes a day will help to establish that habit in your life, and you'll find that you're able to go further and faster in your meditation. If you found it hard to follow the instructions or to remember the instructions, there is an app for that, which you can download for free onto your smartphone, iOS or Android, called MindGem, and that will help to give you instructions and from different teachers in our tradition until you can find one a method or approach to meditation which suits you the best. Here in our meditation center in Nap Hill, we have classes every Tuesday or Thursday evening, which are helpful if you're starting out in meditation, because usually after 7 days you get a little bit sort of lazy. But if you have a group to go to, then it helps to keep you on track. So Tuesday evening meditations are a little bit shorter, Thursday evening a little bit longer. Also online, we still have Zoom meditations, remnant from the pandemic, between 7 and 8 p.m. every Saturday. And exceptionally, coming up on the full moon of July, on the 14th of July, which is a Thursday evening, we have a special full moon meditation, which will incorporate lighting candles or something. It is also a special day in the Buddhist calendar because it's the first day of the Buddhist Lent as well. And I take the opportunity also, for those of you who'd like to take your meditation further, to encourage you to sign up for a meditation retreat, which is coming up between the 8th and 10th of July at a scenic location somewhere in Somerset, which you can find out about by looking on the web link, themeditationshurry.com, for anyone who's interested, who has not already signed up. So for today, I'll leave it there, but if there are any questions, comments, or feedback at this point, I'd be very pleased to hear from you. You be blessed with happiness, success, and prosperity in life, and be well established in the purity of Dhamma practice, whether it be overcoming the impurities from your past or cultivating purity for the future.